In this video, we'll be learning how to find a function's domain. Now, to do this, we're going to use two key rules that we'll always have to keep in mind. Those rules are the following. Denominators cannot equal 0. Remember, it is impossible in mathematics to divide by 0. Therefore, a function's denominator cannot equal to 0. The second key important rule that needs to be remembered is that numbers under square roots cannot be negative. So if we have an expression of x underneath a square root, we'll always have to make sure that that expression is greater than or equal to 0. Now, keeping those in mind, let's go ahead and start and see how we can find a function's domain. Let's say, for instance, we're given the following function. F of x equals to 1 over x minus 6, and we're asked to find this function's domain. Well, remember, when we're being asked to find a function's domain, what we're really being asked is to state all the values for which we can calculate this function. So looking at this function, we can see that we have an x minus 6 on the denominator. And using the first rule we saw, that denominator cannot equal to 0. So the important thing to do here is to figure out when that denominator will equal 0. And to do that, we solve the following equation. We equate x minus 6 to 0, and we solve this. We can solve this very quickly and see that this equals to 0 if x equals to 6. Now, 6 is the value of x for which the denominator will equal to 0. In other words, 6 is the value for which this function is not defined. Therefore, this function's domain are all real numbers with the exception of 6. And we can write this as follows. The domain equals to all x inside R or within R such that x is different or not equal to 6. And there you go. That's this function's domain. Now, you may well have seen different notations for domain. Don't worry, there are plenty other notations. Nonetheless, this notation is valid. And so this function's domain is all real numbers except for 6. Let's look at another example. Let's say we're given the following function. F of x equals to the square root of x plus 8. And again, we're asked to find this function's domain. Well, in this case, we can see that we're dealing with a square root. And in this case, the key thing to remember is that whatever's under the square root cannot be negative. In other words, whatever's under the square root has to be greater than or equal to 0. So, we need to make sure that x plus 8 is greater than or equal to 0. And the way we can do this, or the way we can find the values of x for which that's true, is by solving the following inequality. We can go ahead and solve x plus 8 greater than or equal to 0. And solving this, we find that x has to be greater than or equal to negative 8. And there you go. This function will be perfectly well defined for all values of x which are greater than or equal to negative 8. And in this case, we can go ahead and say that the domain equals to all x values within R, or inside R, such that x greater than or equal to negative 8. And there you have it. Those are a couple of examples showing us how we can find a function's domain. Remember those two key rules. Denominators cannot equal to 0, and numbers under square roots cannot be negative.